Hey, we began last week. Eric kicked off our series, a short series that we're doing called God in the Rest of the Week, where we're talking about a subject that affects all of us or has affected all of us, and that's work. And if you were here last week, we learned learned that God is interested in your job. And like in the video, Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, and that's a key word, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men. You know, and most people in our day and time, and maybe it's always been this way, we think the important thing is what we do for a job, what we do for a career. This verse says whatever it is. So it takes the emphasis off what we're doing into how we're doing it and who we're working for. I read the story this week, a true story of a man who's a Christian. He's a construction supervisor, and he was on a construction site, and he admits he was not having a very good day, and said, you know, everything's going along. The porta-johns are right there, and you know, experience with porta-johns, they're not the cleanest places in the world, and the guy comes driving up that services the porta-johns. And he hears loud music playing, and he comes and that aggravates him here. And the guy jumps out and gets out. He has all his cleaning supplies and stuff, and he goes in the porta-john. You just hear him beating and banging around in there and just working, and just time goes on. He's just really working in there. And then all of a sudden they smell this aroma, a good aroma, a good aroma outside. You know, and the guy's going, for a porta-john, that smells good. And the guy finally comes out, and he says, man, he said, I hate to admit it, but you got it smelling so good, I want to go in there. You know? And he says, I tell you, the guy that's been servicing these things hasn't been doing a very good job, but I will be doing it from now on. He says, I work for the Lord. And he goes and gets in his truck. The loud music starts up again, and it was then that the construction supervisor realized that it was Christian music that was playing so loud, and the guy drives off. But you know, I work for the Lord. That one concept, whether you're cleaning porta-johns or whatever you're doing, if we can get that concept, I work for the Lord, it will literally change your life. It will change your life. And that's why I can say, and that's why God can say, how you work is more important than where you work or what you do for work. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how you work. Does what you claim to believe as a follower of Jesus, what you sing along with on the songs on Sunday morning, do they translate over to your work on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and on? Do they translate from what happens here, what you say you believe, what we sing about? Does it come into play of how you work, the quality of work, the honesty of your work, all the things that you do? And all of those things are important, but it's more than that. It's how do your Christian principles and beliefs control you in the workplace? When you're tempted to do less than you should, when you're tempted to do just enough to get by, when you're tempted to do something dishonest, or when you're tempted to do something that you know is wrong, but the boss has asked you to do it. How do you react to those? Now, at this point, some of you have already turned me off. You've already turned me off for one of several reasons. One, you don't want to talk about work. Or maybe it's the fact that you look at me as a preacher and say, how would you know what it's like to work out in the secular world? Well, you ought to try working with Nancy and Eric and some of those guys. But before you turn me off, listen on. Yeah, maybe I don't know what it's like at your job. Others have turned me off already because you think the expectations of carrying what you learn and what you say you believe and what you sing about here at church and carrying that into the workplace is unreasonable. And it's impossible to do. That you can't survive in the workplace being a good Christian. You'll be taken advantage of. You'll be passed over. You may even lose your job. And maybe you've done a good job of compartmentalizing your life. You know, and just picture the Tupperware boxes. In this box, I've got my church life. And in this one, I've got my work life. And this one, I've got my home life. And this is my friend and recreation life. And we've got them very well separated. And what we are at home and what we are at church is totally different than what we are at work. And that's the way you've gotten comfortable with being it. But let me share a theory with you. Most modern Christians would not think that we bow down to idols, that we have idol worship today, would you? You wouldn't think that. The idea of us bowing down to a statue or something we've made out of wood just seems so silly and backwards to us. But when you think of what the definition of what an idol is, it's something totally different. An idol is anything that comes between you and God. Anything that steals your attention, your allegiance, that comes between you and God, you or I. That changes the whole concept, doesn't it? When we think of idol being defined that way. There are plenty of things that's gotten between us and God. The Bible tells us some of those. It says money can do it. Sex, power, pride, possessions, people, affluence, self. The Bible is clear about those things. And one that just comes to my mind instantly is one of the most innocent ones I've ever seen is the love of sports. In our society today, the love of sports has become an idol. And it is definitely getting between Christians and their God. So it would be an idol. But do you have idols in the workplace? Has work become an idol to you? Consider these three things here. Security, recognition, progress. Could they be three idols that's at your work? Security. You like what your job, you like the stuff you get to buy with the money because you have a job. It's okay with that. You know, we want to be able to put food on the table. We want to be able to take care of our homes and buy homes and things. But it's the security that comes with a home. If you get so tied to that and love that so much that it causes you to deny your faith and not do what's right, what you know is right, because you don't want to mess up the security of your job, then that's an idol. Or how about recognition or reputation? You like the status that comes from having that job. You like the way it makes you feel that you're being productive, that this is your job and people look up to you and that you like that. And so if that's threatened, you may deny God's principles on the work site. Progress. None of us like to go backwards. And if we don't go along at work and we don't do everything that they expect us to do at work, and sometimes that's dishonest and sometimes that's ignoring our family and sometimes that's denying what we know is right and true and good, then we might get passed over. We might get demoted. And we're made to move ahead, not to take a step back. These things can be idols. And this is where it gets dangerous. If we're afraid to lose these things, then they become an idol. And they can force us to do things we wouldn't necessarily do when we get afraid of what we may lose if we stand for God on our jobs. But the truth is we're going to lose something anyway. Regardless, we're going to lose something. If we do not stand for God on the work site, we lose our moral authority. We lose our moral high ground. When we compromise our beliefs, we lose that authority to be able to say to our sons and our daughters, to be able to say, son, now you know that you should do the right thing here. You know you're not supposed to lie. You know what you're supposed to do. And your son or your daughter's going, but I know what you do at work. I know what you do. And you lose that moral authority. When you look at your spouse or your children and you say, you got to trust God. You got to trust God in this. And they go, I do, but you don't. You go by what makes it better at work and not what makes it better for God. But I'm supposed to do something. You know what it makes you? You know what it turns you into? It's a hypocrite in these people's eyes. Because you're expecting them to live to a standard you're not intending to live by. You lose your moral authority, not only with your workers, but with your friends, and probably most importantly, with your family. But you lose something else here that is very important. You lose the opportunity to see God show up, to get to see God at work. What would God have done? How would your life been different if you had taken a stand for God on the workplace instead of compromising your beliefs? You know, if is a big thing, isn't it? 2 letters, big outcome. If you had taken, if you never stand for God and you always compromise and cave in, you'll never know what God would have done. You never know. And that's what you lose when you do that. If is a big word to carry around the rest of your life. Have you noticed that the people that we admire the most, who they are? It's not the people who cave in. It's not the people who compromise. It's not the ones who go along to get along. It's the people who stand up. It's the people who do what's right no matter what. And usually it's when they have the most to lose, we admire them the most when they stand up for what is right. That's just the way we're made. It's a part of us. That's the people we admire. That's the people we want to read about. That's the people we want to know. Today, I want to take a look at one of the stories from the Bible. The Bible's full of those people. I want to take a look at one, and it's such a familiar story. You know why it's a familiar story? Because we like it. Because it's about somebody that took a stand. And so we've read it over and over and over from the time that we could hear a Bible story read to us, even before we could read. And it still means something. The story takes place in 605 BC. And it's found in Daniel chapter 3, if you want to turn there. That's where we're going to be. I touched on this story a couple of months ago. And I talked more about Daniel than I did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you remember the setting, King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians have come in and conquered Judah, and they've taken over Jerusalem. And instead of just killing everybody, they would take the best and the brightest back to Babylon, back to the chief city there, back to bring in in every land they conquered, they brought in the best and the brightest. And that's very smart on King Nebuchadnezzar's part, because you kept filling up this kingdom with the very best people, the most creative, the most educated people there are. And so it made their kingdom stronger. We know 3 of those guys, the 4, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And if you read there in Daniel, we find that they distinguished themselves very quickly. They got jobs as basically city managers, very important jobs. So they had something very large to lose if they didn't toe the line. And we're going to see what happens here. King Nebuchadnezzar decides to build a 90-foot tall golden statue, 9 foot wide, 90 feet tall statue there in the city. It's a golden image. And when he's ready to dedicate this statue that he's built, he invites all of the city officials and everybody, all the high-ranking people to come for the unveiling. Now in Daniel chapter 3, starting with verse 4, it says this: Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." And verse 6 says, "Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Now don't misunderstand what I'm about to say here. But this was a really smart move on King Nebuchadnezzar's part. Because he's got a kingdom that's made up of people from all over the world. They may not even speak the same languages. They've got thousands of gods that they worship. And in this culture, that was fine. You can worship any god you want to, as long as you worship my God first. So King Nebuchadnezzar has his statue built, and says when the music plays, it don't even have to be a language. He says when the music plays, and everybody can understand music, says everybody's to bow down. He's saying you can have all the gods you want as long as I'm the top one. So it's pretty smart on his part to do this. And so it's time to give it a test run, and they play the music, and everybody bows down. Well, almost everybody. Look at verse 8. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. In other words, they were the tattletales. They were the ones who came and tattled. Hey, did you know there were 3 guys and they're Jews? They're Jews on top of that. We don't care for the Jews. These 3 Jewish guys didn't bow down to you, King Nebuchadnezzar. They disobeyed you. They didn't see you as the ultimate authority in their life. Look at verses 13 through 15. This is after they've tattled on them, on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Verse 15. Now when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? You see, Nebuchadnezzar liked them. He was giving them a second chance. He was saying, maybe you just don't understand. You can have your gods, but I'm number one. And I hold your life in the palm of my hand. I own you. So I'm going to give you a second chance to make me the ultimate authority in your life. Look at that last sentence. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Isn't that the same whisper we hear when those moments come where we can stand for God or we can do or deny him? Don't we hear that same whisper? On the in the job site, at school, when we know what we need to do, what we should do, what we believe, what our beliefs are and our convictions are, but when we're standing there at that moment, isn't that the whisper we hear? How's God going to help me now? Do I go with what I see, or do I trust in a God who is unseen, but I know what he's able to do? That's the whisper. That's the moment of decision. Do I trust God or do I trust what is seen? Look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter." You know what they're saying? King, you can stop the band. Just cut the music. We don't need a second chance. And we don't need to apologize for not bowing. We made up our minds what we're going to do. So just stop the music. This is what happens. Verse 17 and 18. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able, remember that, is able to save us from it. And he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. They made a decision long before a statue was ever built that we will not bow down to anyone. We will trust in a God who is able. He says, they're basically saying, King, we know our God and he is able to save us from this fiery furnace. He's able to take us out of your hand. And ultimately he will, one way or the other, dead or alive, we're still in his hands. We know what he's able to do. We just don't know what he's going to do in this situation. It's one of the best answers ever given. Even if he doesn't take us out of this fiery furnace today, it doesn't change anything because we know what he's able to do. They chose to trust in a God who was able instead of the things that they've seen. And we know how it goes on here. This infuriated the king even further. It says that he had the furnace heated up 7 times hotter than normal. He has them thrown in the fire, and you know how the story goes. It says it didn't even burn them up. He calls them back out of the fire, and it says their clothes weren't burned, and they didn't even smell like smoke. I can't even walk into a gas station with somebody smoking and walk out and not smell like a cigarette. And they've been in a fiery furnace, and it says they walk out, and nothing has touched them. Verse 28, it says this. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. Do you kind of wonder sometimes if King Nebuchadnezzar is bipolar? I mean, just a complete reversal of what he's got a split personality here, completely reversed of what he has just said. He said, they trusted in him and defied the king's command, my commands, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Verse 29, therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now here's the point. People think they control us. Governments, presidents, senators, congressmen, bosses, they think they have us right here. And they don't. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ and you do not bow to them. I'm not talking about anarchy. I'm talking about God first in your life. Your jobs come down the line somewhere. You see, when we live in fear, when we compromise, then people do own us. They control what our life will be. But you need to remember, and I need to remember when those moments come, that our God is able. I don't know exactly what he's going to do in this situation, but he is able. And that's who we put our trust in. Let me ask you this very simple question. And this is where I want you to be extremely honest with yourself. You don't have to be honest with me, anybody around you. Keep the same expression on your face. Don't give anything away. But just be honest inside your mind and your soul. Do you think that you are where you are today, professionally, financially, relationally, every area? Do you think you are where you are today because of God? Did God have something to do? Was he the big thing in your life? Was he the big force that drove you, that's brought you to where you are today? Or do you think you're where you are today because of you? I worked a little harder. I'm smarter than the people I work with. I'm good with money. I make good decisions. I'm responsible for where I am in life today. Now, if that's how you feel, then that's fine. But if you believe that God had something to do, God was the driving force that brought you to where you are in life today, then let me ask you this question. Then why do you feel like you have to compromise your beliefs in that God to get or maintain what you've got already? If God is the one who brought you there, if God is the one who put people in your path, who gave you a mom and a dad who taught you in a certain way, who put people in your pathway through your life, if God blessed you and you can say, well, if things would have went a little different, I wouldn't have got this job, or I wouldn't have married this person, or I wouldn't have met this person, or my child wouldn't have lived. And all of these things, when you start seeing it, if you believe God had something to do with that, then why do you feel like you need to compromise your belief in that God to keep what you've got, if God's the one who gave it to you to start with? If you would ask Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, did they get there on their own, or was God in it? They would have told you, oh, God was in this from the very beginning. Number one, we weren't killed when they invaded the land. And then he made sure we got to this new land safely. And then, instead of being put out on a field to work somewhere, we got to live in the king's palace and learn all of this. And then he gave us somebody that was over us for those first 3 years who was sympathetic to us and let us practice our religious ways. And then we believe it was God who had King Nebuchadnezzar recognize our talents and our abilities, and that's why we got these jobs. And we know that it was God who saved us from the fire. What do you think? You know, I don't wish harm on anyone. I don't wish any harm on any of you. But what I do wish for each and every one of us is if we could experience a little bit what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. That we would have those pivotal moments there where it's all on the line. It's right there on the line that I need to either obey God or I obey man. And you decide to obey God. And it's scary. And I haven't had a tremendous amount of them in my life, but I've had a few where you stood for God, and on the other side of where you drew that line, you didn't know what was lying there. I don't know what tomorrow holds. I just know what God is able. And every time God showed up, every time my witness to others was strengthened because I did that. Every time, no exceptions. We need to be scared a little bit by the fiery furnace. And we need to stand and not know what lies on the other side, but we do know that we have a God who is able. A God who is able. You see, a wonderful thing happens when God's faithfulness and our faith collide in life situations. Wonderful things happen. And that's what I wish for you and I, not only on the work site, but school, at home, everywhere we go, that God's faithfulness and our faith collide.